Music theory is important, but often confusing. If you've ever felt lost trying to learn music theory, this is the only guide you'll need. No confusing words, no unnecessary details, just the essentials explained simply, so you can actually use them in your playing. In this video, I cover the following topics, and I provided timestamps in the description for each part. Part 1. The musical alphabet. There are 12 notes in the musical alphabet. There are 7 natural notes, the letters C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, and then there are 5 sharps or flats. This is easiest to visualize on a piano. The 7 letters are the white keys, and the black keys are the sharps, which are half a tone higher than the note before. So the 12 notes are C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, and B. You will notice that there is no black key in between E and F, and in between B and C. And that is because B and E have no sharp. These 5 extra notes are called sharps if we go up in pitch, and flats if we go down in pitch. So a C sharp is also called a D flat, a D sharp and E flat, etc. Just know these are the same notes. Also, there are obviously more than 12 keys on a piano, but these are the same notes, just in a different pitch. On a guitar it's harder to see the notes, but they are the same. Let's start with the strings. In a normal tuning they are the low E string, A, D, G, B, and the high E string. Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. So on the low E string, for example, it's the open E string, then it's F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and back to E. The 12th fret is always the same note as the open string, but 1 octave higher. The other strings follow the same order. It's helpful if you know where all the notes are, and there are some tricks to help you memorize faster, but that's a different video. The distance between notes is often called a tone, or a semitone, also called a whole step or half a step. On a guitar this equates to a 2-fret distance for a whole tone, and 1 fret distance for a semitone. Part 2. The major scale. First off, what is a scale? A scale is nothing but a collection of notes, and the major scale is a fundamental scale that is widely used, and it will help you understand music theory. A major scale is a 7-note scale with a bright and happy sound. The major scale has a specific pattern of whole and half steps between notes, and the formula for determining a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. This formula works for every major scale. And since there are 12 notes, there are 12 different major scales. Let's start with the C major scale, as that is the easiest scale since it has no sharps or flats. Let's take a look at the 12 notes again, starting with C, as that is our root note. We learned that the formula for a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Whole in this case means we go up 2 notes, and half means we go up 1 note. So if we start at the root note, in this case a C, and we go up using the formula, we get the following 7 notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And these 7 notes make up the C major scale. Let's look at another example. The G major scale is also an easy scale since it only has 1 sharp. We start at the root note, the G, we apply the formula, and we end up with the following notes: G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. So these 7 notes make up the G major scale. As I said, there are 12 notes, so there are 12 different major scales. If you take a close look, you will notice 2 things. One is that sometimes you see B sharp or E sharp, for example in the F sharp or C sharp major scale, and these notes aren't part of the musical alphabet. The other thing you will notice is that some scales suddenly use flats instead of sharps. Both these 2 things have the same reason why. A key principle in music theory is that each note in a major scale must include 1 version of each letter. For example, in the F sharp major scale, if we listed the 7th note as F instead of E sharp, then the letter E wouldn't be represented in the scale, and we would violate this key principle. The reason this is done is to avoid confusion and for consistency, although in the beginning it might add confusion, but now you know. If if we go to the guitar and play a major scale. There are several ways we can do this. To play the C major scale, we can start at the 3rd fret of the A string, which is a C, and then we can apply the formula. Whole in this case means going up 2 frets, and half means go up 1 fret. Playing it on one string makes it easy to visualize, but usually a major scale is played across strings, and this can be done all over the fretboard. Part 3. Intervals. Intervals are used for creating melodies, building chords, they make up scales, so it's useful to know about them. You often hear things like major second, perfect fourth, etc. But what are they? Simply put, an interval is a difference in pitch between notes. If we go back to our C major scale, C is the root note. In this scale, D is the second of C, or from C to D is an interval of a second. E is the third of C, etc. In classical music theory, these intervals are also called a major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, and major seventh. So F is the perfect fourth of C, for example. Now this doesn't change or add anything per se, it is just the more traditional way of naming intervals, and it does give you more info about how big the interval is. If we want to describe the distance from one note to any other note in the musical alphabet, it gets a little more complicated. Let's use the C as a root note again, and how it relates to the other notes of the musical alphabet. If we would play 2 identical C notes in a row, it's called a unison, or a perfect unison. The other intervals that we just learned stay the same, but you can see that the major changes to minor when the distance is half a step less. So from C to C sharp is a minor second. From C to D sharp is a minor third, to G sharp a minor sixth, and to A sharp is a minor seventh. The note in between the 2 perfect intervals, a distance of 6 half steps, is called augmented fourth or diminished fifth. If we go from C to another C, or from any note to another note with the same name, at a higher or lower pitch, this is called an octave. When the distance is 1 octave apart, it's called a perfect octave. On a piano, this is super easy to find. You just move 12 keys, counting black and white, to the left or right. On a guitar, it's a little harder, but there are several fixed octave shapes, and once you know them, they're easy. The simplest way to find an octave is to pick any note and go up 12 frets on the same string. You will notice they sound the same, but at a different pitch. They're 1 octave apart. Memorizing these octave shapes is a great way to familiarize yourself with the fretboard. Part 4. Triads. We see different scales all the time, but what can we do with them? There are many things we can do with them, and one of them is to make chords. Let's take the major scale and turn it into a chord. Most common chords consist of just 3 notes. If we look at the C major scale again, the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. The formula for a major triad is the root note, the 3rd note, and the 5th note. In our C major scale, that are the notes C, E, and G. This means the C major chord consists of these 3 notes. Now these notes can be repeated, and they often are, but any combination of these 3 notes make up a C major chord. That's why there are so many variations of the same chord. Another example. If we have an E major scale and we use the same formula, root, 3rd, and 5th, then we get the notes E, G sharp, and B. And these 3 notes together make up the E major chord. Good to know, this formula works for every major chord. Now what about minor chords? The formula for a minor triad is the root note, the flattened 3rd, and the 5th. Flattened 3rd just means we take the 3rd note and we go down half a tone. So in the example earlier with the E chord, our G sharp becomes a G. So if we play an open G string instead of the 1st fret, we now have an E minor chord. As I said earlier, most chords consist of just 3 notes, but there are exceptions. Power chords, like C5, D5, E5, etc., only have 2 notes. These consist of the root note and the 5th note from the major scale. Power chords are often played with the root note, the fifth, and the root note again, but one octave higher. Some chords also consist of 4 different notes. Sixth or seventh chords like the C minor sixth or the C major seventh. They are the triads we know with one note added, but don't worry about these for now. Besides the open chord shapes we know, an easy way to play all the 12 major and minor chords are with bar chords. If you know these 4 shapes, you can play all the major and minor chords on 5 or 6 strings. The root note, the lowest note you play on either the low E or A string, determines which chord it is. Part 5. Chord families. Songs are often in a certain key, which is nothing more than a group of notes used in a song, and they follow a certain chord progression, a sequence of chords played in a song. Back to our C major scale. Take all notes from the C major scale and number them. You often see Roman numerals in music, but you can also just name them 1 through 7. Now apply the following formula: 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished. And we get the following chords: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Don't worry about the diminished one for now. These 7 chords give you the chord family from C, and they all sound good together. If we follow some popular chord progressions, such as 1-4-5, 1-6-4-5, or 1-5-6-4, we get the following chords: C F G, C A minor F G, C G A minor F, and you will find many popular songs revolving around these exact chords. If you know these 4 chords, you will be able to play basic versions of hundreds of songs from bands and musicians such as the Beatles, the Police, Ben E. King, and many more. Since there are 12 major scales, there are 12 major chord families. Understanding this section helps you understand why certain chords sound good together while others don't, and it will make it easier to work out the chord sequence of a song. Often the first chord used in a song will tell you the song's key, and you will often see the same chords following each other. For example, the 5th chord often resolves to the first chord, which is known as a perfect cadence. Now what about minors? There are 12 natural minor scales and 12 minor chord families. To make it easier, every major key has a relative minor. The relative major and minor share the same notes but start on a different root note. The relative chord families share the same chords but start on a different one. The 6th chord of a major scale is that chord's relative minor. For example, the relative minor of C major is the A minor. To find out the minor chord family, we take that 6th chord and put it first, and then keep the same order of chords. So the A minor chord family is A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, and G major. Now we can see that the 3rd chord of a minor chord family is that chord's relative major. You can work out all relative major and minor chord families this way, but here's a complete list of major and minor keys which is helpful to remember or to use as a reference. Part 6. Scales. A scale is nothing but a collection of notes sequenced in a certain way. They provide the foundation for melodies, harmonies, and improvisation. And many scales are derived from the major scale, which we looked at earlier. Besides the major scale, we have the pentatonic scale, minor scale, blues scale, and many others. One of the most common scales are the pentatonic scales. The reason they are so popular is that they are great for solos. If you know in what key a song is, playing the notes from the corresponding pentatonic scale sounds great over it. There are the major and minor pentatonic scales. Penta comes from the Greek word for 5, so these are 5-note scales. Let's start with the major pentatonic scale. The major pentatonic scale is nothing but the major scale without the 4th and 7th notes. So the notes C, D, E, G, and A make up the C major pentatonic scale. Now for the minor pentatonic scale. The formula for the minor pentatonic scale is the root note, flattened 3rd, 4th, 5th, and flattened 7th. Flatten means you move down half a tone. If we take these notes from the major scale, we get the minor pentatonic scale. So the C minor pentatonic consists of the notes C, E flat, F, G, and B flat. Since there are 12 notes, this means there are 12 major and 12 minor pentatonic scales. But you don't have to memorize 24 scales. There are 5 pentatonic shapes for the guitar that you can move across the fretboard, with the root note determining which scale it is that you are playing. And do you remember that each major has a relative minor? For example, the C major pentatonic has the exact same notes as the A minor pentatonic, only the root note changes. So if you know these 5 shapes, you can play all major and minor pentatonic scales all over the fretboard. It might look difficult, but they're actually really easy to remember. Another popular scale is the blues scale. Like the pentatonic scale, it's great for improvisation and solos. It is a 6-note scale popular in surprisingly the blues, but also in other styles such as jazz, country, and rock. The blues scale is the pentatonic scale with 1 note added, which is called the blue note. To go from a major pentatonic scale to a major blues scale, you add a flattened 3rd note. Using the C major scale as an example again, the flattened 3rd note here is an E flat. When you add that note to the C major pentatonic, it becomes a C major blues scale. This blue note creates a feeling of tension that resolves well into the other notes of the scale and gives the scale a distinct sound. To go from a minor pentatonic scale to a minor blues scale, you add a flattened 5th note. So the C minor blues scale consists of the notes C, E flat, F, G flat, G, and B flat. Again, the relative major and minor rule applies. So the C major blues scale has the same notes as the A minor blues scale. Lots of music is in a minor key. A song that is in a major key is often bright or happy. A song that is in a minor key is often dark and sad. But why is that? After all, the chords that are used are the same. The answer lies in which chord is emphasized. When starting with a major chord, you get a tone that is happier. And when leading with a minor chord, the tone gets darker. Now let's look at the natural minor scale, also called Aeolian mode. To turn a major scale into a minor scale, you flatten the 3rd, 6th, and 7th notes. So a C minor scale consists of the notes C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat. If you take out the 2nd and 6th notes from this, you end up with the C minor pentatonic scale again. See how everything is connected? I hope this video cleared up any confusion you had regarding music theory. If there are any questions, please let me know. And if you feel you've gotten value from this video, please like the video. Thanks.